Okay. So I'm going to talk about blended assessment today. Just showing you some of the tools that you can use. And Sanwabri is here. Sanwabri, do you want to come and just join? Whenever there are other questions that I can't answer. So these are some graphs that Zaki shared with us at a meeting a few days ago. And these are just some departments. And he has intentionally not put the names of the departments there. But it just gives you an interesting view at a glance of what people use. And you can see across all departments, they use a lot of content. Yeah, the light blue stuff is the content. The green stuff is files that people upload. The orange stuff is announcements. But then the purple stuff is online tests. And you can see some departments making quite a lot of, taking quite a lot of advantage of online tests. Assignments is the orange stuff, the orange thing, which is also used quite a bit. SafeAssign is the light green at the back, which is very little actually so far. So you get an idea of what people do. Also the use of gradebook by departments, it's a bit light, but some departments use it quite a lot, some departments very little. So it's spread not equally across the university, but in quite interesting ways. So beyond Blackboard, there's a million of tools and applications that you can use for assessing students on various levels of Bloom's taxonomy. If people have, sorry, where's my, my slide. I'm not going to talk too much about this today. You've seen me use Kahoot. I believe last time you were introduced to Plickers and Poll Everywhere. Those are other tools that you can use for formative assessment to get quick feedback. I'm not going to focus on this too much, but today what I'm going to talk about is mainly Blackboard, because that is where the bulk of the assessment will happen, because it's secure, it tracks students' progress. If you're thinking of assessment seriously, you will eventually end up using Blackboard for especially your summative assessment. And where it all starts, for those who are using Blackboard, you know there's an assessment tool, and in that assessment tool, all the various things that you can do on Blackboard will be listed, and it will give you an option of the kind of tools that you can use. I think what people use a lot is assignments. The assignment tool, how many of you use the assignment tool on Blackboard? About half of you. So this is just a way of creating assignments, giving students the necessary information that they need, and collecting the assignment. And it helps you because it tracks students' progress, it tracks deadlines. You can at a glance, you can see who has submitted, who has not submitted. So it helps with managing assignments when you have a large class of students in particular. So you can see at a glance who submitted, who didn't submit yet. You can mark the assignments on Blackboard. You can give comments. You can use rubrics. You can submit it through SafeAssign to get an originality report to see whether students have plagiarized, to help themselves see whether they have plagiarized. What I really like is the comment function. Have you used this before? Have you seen it on Blackboard? The commenting function allows you to comment straight into the student assignment. So you don't have to download it anymore. You can actually comment on Blackboard onto a student's assignment. I also use Google Docs a lot, because what you can do there, the comments can become a conversation, because you can have more than one person commenting. You can have the student respond to your comments. I really like that, in particular for longer essays, for proposals, when you supervise students. I find Google Doc a really, really helpful tool. You can get into a conversation. This is an assignment in our check course. You can see one of the facilitators. These are the two facilitators, Marike and myself, replying. But then you can also see the student himself, Andres Steenkamp, who jumps into the conversation. And so the assignment in terms of feed forward and allowing students to improve their assignment for the next submission, maybe for a final project, really helps you to get into a conversation around your assignment. It's not just a one-way conversation between the student submitting the assignment and you responding. It actually becomes a dialogical experience. So in terms of L'Oreal's conversational framework, it allows you to get into a conversation with your students. I really like the Rubric Tool. I find it helps immensely in assessing students' work. So you can have individual rubrics. So you create a rubric for an individual assignment, but you can also create rubrics for group assignments, where you allocate either the same mark to each and every student, or you can actually even edit it and allocate different marks if you feel some students have done more work than others. And it calculates the score automatically. I think, for me, it makes sense. It helps me assessing students' work. There's a new tool that we have very recently discovered, and Sonwabo is the absolute expert on that. Blackboard allows for self and peer assessment, which is quite interesting. So you can actually assess your own assignment and score it, but you can also assess peer assignments. And we have used that in the Czech course this year. It is a bit tricky because you have to set the deadlines extremely tightly. So there's a deadline for students to submit the work, and there's another deadline for students to then give feedback. And that deadline is strict. You cannot change that because there's no buffer. Everything needs to be in before it can be validated. And we had a bit of an issue in our short course there, but that is just the nature of the tool. But it allows you to allocate scores for self and peer assessment, and as a lecturer then you can calculate a final score and add your assessment as well. This is the task we ask our short course participants to do. They had to introduce a tool to support blended communication or collaboration in their learning and in their teaching, and they had to reflect on that and then upload it to the Blackboard assignment tool. That was step 1. And it had a strict deadline, even there was an hour attached to it. And then as a second step, they had to then provide feedback to 2 of their colleagues' work. So they could choose any of 2 colleagues, but the moment one colleague had received 2 reviews, then you couldn't review more. There's a limit to how many reviews you can have per student, which helps you control that the whole class gets 2 reviews from their peers. And ideally, you also attach a rubric and help students in the assessment. And it's both a verbal feedback and actually a score that you can allocate to your peers. And then it calculates across all evaluations and calculates a final score. So it's a nice tool to use if you want to encourage students to look at each other's work. Yeah?
After the blended learning course, I tried it. My student number is about 44. And maybe I'm just a greenie in this, but it was very difficult and I just abandoned it.
Okay.
But I'll try it again. But I think if you've got smaller numbers,
It's easier.
It's easier to start off with.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as you jump in with 44 students, it becomes a bit tricky.
Okay.
Also, maybe it's because I didn't know it then.
Yeah.
I'm just
Yeah.
saying,
No, it is a bit of a
not
tricky
use it,
tool
but it's not-
because the students have to understand there are very strict deadlines. There's just a certain period of time that they can either submit and then give feedback. But it's a nice tool to try out. This is a SafeAssign report. So this shows you or shows the students themselves if what they wrote in an essay, whether they have cited everyone correctly or whether there's any kind of plagiarism, and it actually gives you also the original sources. How many of you use SafeAssign? Okay. What is your experience with that? Do you find it useful?
You can actually have the students submit it up front.
Yes.
And check their plagiarism level.
Before they
And there's no
submit
review
them.
afterwards.
Yeah. So they can submit a draft to check the originality report, and then they can submit the final draft that then should not have any issues. And it's a really nice tool to actually, as a preventive tool, to teach them what plagiarism is, because it's not so much a policing tool as it just alerts you to where you might have just forgotten quotation marks or you have not paraphrased correctly. So it's really a learning tool for students, and that's how actually it should be sold and not as a policing tool. I don't like even I call it originality report rather than plagiarism report, because that already sets a different tone when you talk about.
We as the lecturers might be not aware of, which I've discovered along the way, is that when students are writing maybe a big report and they submit maybe the first chapter of the first semester and then the next chapter, which includes the first chapter and the next one, it picks up your own work.
Yes.
So it says, oh,
You
a big
self-plagiarize.
plagiarism section, but in the meantime it's referring to
Yeah.
your previous work that you submitted.
So what you do, you
just
submit
be
as
aware of that.
so you submit as a draft. As long as you submit as a draft, they don't add it to your to the database. So it's not going to be checked against it. But that's a very important point that you're making.
Students will be like, oh.
Yeah. Because even if you submit a proposal, when you supervise a student, submit it as a draft, because part of the proposal will become the full thesis. And if the proposal is added to the database, it will pick up everything that the student has written in the proposal. That's Turnitin though. For those who supervise, Corey Ice does training sessions now in October on the 15th and 16th on Turnitin, which is a slightly more sophisticated tool that we use for postgraduate supervision. And the other, I think, main tool that people use is the online tests, both for self-test, for formative testing, as weekly tests as students go on, and for summative testing. I love that Sarita is sitting there. I hope she can jump in when we talk about online exams. But again, it's a very easy way to set it up in Blackboard. You can either set it up in Blackboard straight, or you can use responders and then import the questions into Blackboard. There are many different question types. So people, when they think online test, they immediately think multiple choice, but there are actually endless question types, and I think it's really important to be quite creative and varied in your question type selection, because it can become quite boring if it's just one multiple choice question after the other. I think these are all examples by Bronwyn Swartz on her statistical courses. So you can see she brings in formulas. You can attach documents if there's something that you can actually not type in the Blackboard interface. You can attach questions or videos if you want students to watch them. And this is a multiple choice. This is a fill in the gap. And this is what is really interesting, because often people say it's really difficult to test at higher levels of understanding of Bloom's taxonomy. But what's a very simple trick is not to ask what is the correct question, but ask what is the most correct question, or ask which are the two correct questions in this in these answers. So to try and encourage your students to think a little bit further than just what sounds correct or incorrect. So there are easy ways to move up on that Bloom's taxonomy when you're designing your question, because that's really the most difficult bit when it comes to online testing, is to design your question in a way that they test on different levels of that Bloom taxonomy.
I'm just thinking that question of which is the most correct.
Yeah.
It's highly subjective, because that would be the case for me,
Yeah.
and not for you.
Sure. But the nice thing also is that once you do that, and you go through the answers, and you see that there are answers that could possibly be correct, you can always overwrite it. Or you can...
Well, I also guess that it also forces them to give reasons.
Exactly,
which
to
is
argue
what
their case. And you could have an open text box underneath, say, argue your case. Why do you think these are the two most correct answers? So you can be as creative as you want with these things. This is another interesting example. This is an Isikosa conversation class. So the lecturer is not interested in students being in the grammar or in the spelling, because it's a conversational class. So it is fill in the box types of questions, but there is a long list of possible spellings for each and every word. And the lecturer adds to if he sees there's another misspelling, he'll just add that to the possibilities. So he's not really interested in the correct spelling. He just wants to know whether the students more or less know what the word is. because that is what he's testing for, conversational isiXhosa, not written isiXhosa.
Well, I don't see the irony there. You talk of isiXhosa, and the lady that I put in there is very far from you.
That is true. I agree. So the tips for creating MCQs, because that is really the magic in this. It's not the technical stuff. That's actually very straightforward and easy, but it's about creating multiple choice questions that can test your students on various levels. So the incorrect answers must be as plausible as the correct answers. So that is one of the tricks that people use. And Jonathan will talk later about how you can use Blackboard once people have written tests to see which of your options are not working because they're too easy or difficult, and which helps you give feedback then to redesign for the next time. Ask them to choose between different descriptions for certain processes to test their evaluative skills, to try to test them on the analytical and evaluative level. Use examples of story scenarios to test understanding and analyzing skills. Use most appropriate, most important. Use two correct answers, most correct answers. Integrate charts into your questions to force learners to use analytical skill. So you can use a lot of things beyond just a typical multiple choice question that we immediately think of when we think these tests. You can also use it for open book assessments and exams, and that became very popular during the FISMAS 4 protests, where lecturers came asking us for help in terms of open book exams because they were worried that people would cheat if it was a closed book exam. And it works. If you ever create a random pool of questions, if it's about challenging problem solving where there's not one possible answer, but where students also have to actually reflect on how they got to the answer, where they have to integrate their own personal lives, personal reflections, so each and every answer will be different because it speaks directly to students' scenarios and lived experience. Case studies, multiple possible answers, inclusion of process. You can actually ask them to take a picture of the calculation and upload it to the question. So you'll see that they've actually done their work and not just copied. Today we are not. And this is if you're running online exams like Sarita. Do you want to speak briefly about this? Just give us a few minutes. Do you want to quickly say what you're doing with your students?
Yes, we use Respondus lockdown browser with Monitor. But I think I've previously done the presentation here. Well, the most important thing is that we identify who the learner is. You can never quite, I don't think you can ever quite prevent cheating. If someone wants to cheat, they'll find a way. But what we also do, in addition to this, to locking them into the system and having a monitor watching them, is to, as Daniela said, you create a pool of questions and you randomize your question paper. I always say to students, you can sit next to your friend. It's an open book. You can sit next to your friend, but I randomize the questions, essays mixed with MCQs, etc., and I make the time quite tight. It's still cheating will take place, and what we do is we roll out more than one exam, especially for the more quantitative subjects. If you have a calculation, for example, with an escalation of 5%, you will have another calculation in another paper with an escalation of 6%, and no one even notices it, but then the answers come back and they've got the same answer, and you realize
Online exam
actually communicating. Anyway, it's a handy tool for distance learning.
Shall we just 3 minutes?
exams offer a powerful way to assess students. But how do you know the right person is taking the exam? How do you keep the students from printing or emailing the questions to classmates? How do you prevent access to books, phones, or other devices? In short, how do you protect the integrity of online exams? The answer? Lockdown Browser and Respondus Monitor. With Lockdown Browser, students are locked into the exam until they submit it for grading. They can't print, capture screen content, go to other web pages, or access other applications during the exam. Lockdown Browser integrates seamlessly with your learning system, making it easy for both instructors and students. In proctored environments, such as testing centers or classrooms, Lockdown Browser provides all the security you need. But when students take exams from home or from the other side of the world, how do you ensure they're the right person and that they're not using inappropriate resources? That's where Respondus Monitor comes in. Respondus Monitor enhances Lockdown Browser through the use of a webcam and video recordings. Before the exam, a startup sequence makes sure the student's webcam and microphone are working properly. Then, the student might be asked to show identification, take a brief video of their environment, or review special instructions. The student is recorded during the exam, and afterward, an instructor can see detailed information, such as the length of the exam and the student's grade. The instructor can also view thumbnails taken at random intervals. There's no need to watch each video from beginning to end. That's because Respondus Monitor is foremost a deterrent to cheating. Students feel less pressure to cheat when there's a level playing field, and that's what Respondus Monitor provides. Of course, if the instructor sees something amiss, the full video is always there for review. Instructors access Respondus Monitor from within their online course. There are no outside websites to log on to, no third-party systems or rosters to manage. Respondus Monitor provides incredible scalability, supporting thousands of test takers at any given time. This means instructors don't have to worry about busy testing centers or limiting the number of exams in a course. For students, the only technical requirements are a computer, a webcam, and a decent internet connection. Exams can be taken from anywhere in the world at any time of day or night. There's no need to schedule a proctor in advance, and students don't have to worry about strangers watching them while taking their exam. Over 700 universities and school districts use Lockdown Browser or Respondus Monitor. That's because the applications are designed exclusively for higher education and secondary schools. It doesn't matter if your institution has only a few blended learning courses or is entirely online. Flexible licensing allows you to get started with a plan that's right for you. But what you'll never find with us are per exam or hourly fees. No way. It doesn't matter if the course has 3 exams or 30. It's always one low cost. Lockdown Browser and Respondus Monitor offer cost-effective, scalable, and convenient solutions for protecting the integrity of online exams. To learn more, visit respondus.com.
So we have a license for this. So if you're interested in running online exams, let us know. Might become interesting for the PG DIPS if you are thinking of offering it a more flexible way and students cannot make it to campus for exams. Those are options you could consider. So the benefits of online exams, I think it's pretty forward. It's automated marking. It can save you a lot of time, but there's always a check necessary. I think anybody who is doing the online exams, you will never release the marks without checking answers. Do you check every answer, Sarita? You do. Because there is human error. You can tick a wrong option as the correct one. So as a lecturer, you have to go through all exams and check that there doesn't need to be anything that needs to be written, any questions that are ambiguous, that you can change retrospectively. You can have multiple markers, you can invite external moderators to look at your exams, you can comment, you can get immediate feedback on your work, you can allow multiple attempts, you can use the best attempt, the last attempt, you can use an average of the 3 attempts if you offer that. So it's up to you to decide what you want to use.
If you're marking and you discover you made a mistake in your memo, or you need to add something to your memo, you can add it into your memo and it will automatically remark all the attempts within like a few seconds. So, because students can write things in very innovative and creative ways. They can write a number in 7 different ways. And so you discover they wrote a number in a way that you hadn't thought about, but you would have marked it right. Just go back to the memo, change it, press a button, and it remarks 500 exam papers immediately within a second.
What I really like is this ability to feed forward, to give feedback and ask students to resubmit and to get into that conversation around their work. And what Jonathan will talk about is the item analysis that allows you to get very detailed feedback on your question and options as to whether they are all well or whether they can be improved in terms of probability or You can see exactly how many students took what option, so which is more probable, which is less probable. Allows you to design better question for the next year. And students really love that. That is a slide of Sarita's presentation that we did at the beginning of the year. We asked the students, these are the first distance learners at the university, the National Diploma in Real Estate, and 73% they prefer the online assessments, 73% prefer the online assessments, 90% prefer the online assignments. So nearly everyone wants to submit their assignments online, and interestingly, nearly 3/4 actually prefer to sit online exams rather than come to campus and do the assessments on paper. And we were quite worried at the beginning that people might find that daunting and scary. You know, what if the internet cuts off? You know, all these questions that we had at the beginning. But
we trained them from the beginning of the year, and we have to test the lecture to it's an ongoing process.
And what's interesting, 78% said they had no problems with assignments and assessments, and 80% said they managed to submit their assignments on time. I'm not sure if that's true, but it's a high figure.
We also a bit kind there because we take into account that they all the technology space, and so the first year we didn't actually refuse any late assignments.
Okay.
This year we're a little bit stricter.
Okay. And what's really interesting, and that's a whole nother session, is the whole idea of retention centers and helping you to identify students as risk. The more you use these kind of online activities, the more Blackboard is able to track your students' practice and activity online, the better it will be able to also to assist you in saying these students have a problem. They've missed deadlines, they have grade alerts, there's activity alerts, they haven't logged on to Blackboard for the last 2-3 weeks or last 2-3 days. There's an access problem. So you can set those rules. What you think might be an indicator for some challenges, some problem. And Blackboard can give you that list and allows you to then email the students and ask, is there something going on? Is there something that you're struggling with? Anything that I can support you with. So it helps you, especially again with large classes, to keep track of your students' movement if you use the online space extensively. So that was me. I think tea has just come. I've heard them bring it. So I would suggest we break for tea. It's 10 to 11, so it's usually half an hour. Is that correct, Norian? So we'll start again 20 past 11, and Jonathan can take over. If there are any questions?
I'm going to give it back. We're just waiting for some of the catering